We are live. Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and welcome to this Third Pillar Thursday, one of my favorites. Hey there, Cam. For today, of course, and all week long, we've been talking about game design, but I wanted to bring up the fact that as a surprise, I did do a video yesterday. Not my normal time. I was kind of happy because I thought I was scheduled to work and didn't have to. I did a video on Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Not necessarily the entire book. It is chocked full of information, but WotC, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast has released something in this book that got me very happy, and so I did a little bit of a page-through review. As a matter of fact, my face doesn't even appear on that video. On pages 150 through 170 of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, it's literally titled Environmental Hazards, and it goes into, it's a little bit Planescape-esque. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but they finally give us some things that are written down that I've been a proponent of for very many years. And in the opening of the introduction of the book, they actually say that most players and game masters during the entire history of Dungeons and Dragons have been using very many of the same elements that are written in the book, but there's also a large and vocal contingent that refuses to do things that are not specifically laid out with printed word by Dungeons and Dragons, WotC, and whatnot. So they decide to print it in there. And of course, they have what I think is quite small but significant section on natural hazards. And then they have a huge percentile styled list of options for people who want to incorporate the elements of various other planes of existence. Not necessarily planes of existence, but flavor of interactions over different things. So they have like the Blessed Realm and the Haunted and the Infested. So it could be another plane of existence. It could be an incursion. It could be a secret or hidden valley between mountains, or the miasma left over by, I don't know, an elder god that just suddenly landed on your world or something of that nature. And the reason why I bring this up, isn't really a segue. It does have something important to do with game design, with the title being Art and Arithmetic. And that is the third pillar of exploration. It involves, of course, the word exploration, with the first and second pillar dealing with combat and social interactions. And when it comes to game design, oftentimes I know I am a visual individual. And when I design things, currently I'm designing one now called a role-playing game called Retcon. And I can imagine where I feel like the players would be, or certain situations, like a photograph of sorts. But I have to take into account, how do the players get there? Why would they want to be there? And does the game incorporate the environmental effects of what it is that the game deals with? So an example would be, if you're designing a game that's, say, post-apocalyptic, well, what apocalyptic posting do you have in the game that represents this, maybe a desolate world, or something after a war, or blowing black sands that are like glass, or dehydration, or getting lost, or random strange hazards like, airplanes stuck inside of office buildings, or random machines that run around trying to hunt and or kill the player characters. So if you have a world, say a fantasy world, but it's based on a different type of culture, like from India or Burma or Chile, or I don't know, Madagascar or something, it behooved for me for game designing, I really love to be immersed in the world in which it matters. Little things that you can do that, whether it's something social. So let's go with social exploration. When it comes to exploring the world that you're designing, it players need things to play with, if that makes sense. They need things to challenge their creativity, their memories, their minds, and baubles in order to use. So, for example, maybe in your world, it's important for people to travel with a particular medallion, or in order to pass from one country to another, they have to exchange gifts. Or when people get together, each person brings a little bit of food to a meal that everyone shares. And so the players require hunting and or gathering materials for food items to bring with them. We can imagine our own real world when it comes to social interactions, what people do in between their social interactions. For example, having meals together is often a commonality, whether it is over drink like wine or tea or chai or something. You can imagine people smoking a hookah and sharing of that as they converse with each other. There is this idea of everyone's sitting in a bathhouse and they have to undress and get into a steam bath or a sauna or something, and so on and so forth, right? Like Viking culture, everyone's sitting in a big hall, all eating with their hands and talking loudly around a table until someone slams their large staff down to get everyone's attention or something. I don't know, but having baubles to play with. Where do I sit? Who do I talk to? Am I breaking? And this is for social exploration. Who do I address first? Do I give a gift? Is there are there certain words that I must make certain pronouncements or something before something else happens? Do I leave my weapon at the door? Must I take my when I say clothing off? Must I undress completely to get into the bathhouse, or is it just a matter of this is a warrior culture and I must have my weapon branded to show that I am a warrior class and I get to sit at the table rather than being servant class and standing on the outskirts and standing during the entire proceedings or something. Also, with social exploration, you can start to twist and turn those things. For example, in our real world cultures, and in say wearing the shirt Game of Thrones, there's the idea of invited hospitality, that there is no violence done when someone is invited to a meal. And this could be a point of contention in a world where it's maybe barbaric, or there are many enemies sitting across the table from each other. But maybe in this world of piracy, when someone's ship is sinking, they go to lend help. If that help is lent to you, it is a cultural norm that you are not to, until the sun sets, you are not to take arms against your saviors or something, the people that rescued you or whatever. And you can have a lot of these rules happening, and a way for the players to immerse themselves into the rules instead of going all ham when they're told to, spend 3 copper pieces in order to pay a toll or enter the city state or something. And there's always always get that one player that's like, 3 copper pieces, F that, I'm going to slit his throat. And you're just like rolling your eyes like, oh my goodness. So incorporating a lot of cultural aspects in the world that the players can explore and discover might be pretty important. Second of all, when it comes to using the exploration pillar for game design, tactics can be a thing. Tactics can be a thing that can really change the dynamic of combat in your game world. Tired Meat Sleep says, I see arithmetic, I panic. I'm also late. No, you're not. And I saw that you stopped by the other day. It wasn't a problem. I did a live stream spur of the moment to talk about Tasha's Cauldron and something inside of it that I hold dear, which is environmental hazards. One thing that I find pretty ironic is that I've been promoting the idea that when using environmental hazards, that we have a whole list of them. They're just called spell effects, And then, of course, what does what does Watsy go and do? They Watsy goes and incorporates. Ooh, let's see if I can. The light is too bright. There we go. There's a list right here of you can't really read it, but right here, there's a list of what environmental effects and then the spells that they relate to in the game. And while it's like a page and a quarter of that kind of stuff, I'm still like, you guys could have given a little bit more than that. Could have hired me. I'd have drawn some stuff out about that, but whatever. Tired Neat Sleep says, I can't get Tasha's until December. UK delivery times. Yeah. Sorry. Now, mind you, listen, I'm a small fish in a big pond. You're going to find lots of people out there doing Tasha's reviews, but they're going to start with, like, of course, the bread and butter, the sexiness, player options, character classes, and that kind of thing. So you'll find that. But eventually they're going to get to page 150, and hopefully they will do a better job than I did doing a page through. So anyway, tactically, based on the kind of game you're designing, could really be important. Yeah, Tired Eat Sleep says Path of the Beast Barbarian. How cool sounding is that? Yeah, there's some pretty cool elements in it. Marquise Hardis, who just released Scavenger, his own 5th edition version of a fantasy post-apocalyptic world of like tribalism, is doing building a world only from all of the elements within Tasha's Cauldron, and basically saying, okay, well, whatever is listed in here tells me about the world. I wonder what a world would be like with only these options available and no other options from the player's handbook. It's kind of a cool thought experiment. But when it comes to tactics in role-playing games, a lot of times we don't give a lot of flavor to using the environment and make it tactical so that players have many options instead of defaulting to spamming one particular function over another. For example, currently in 5th edition, many people default to, say, spell effects or I hit it with my sword again. And while cool, if we aren't given very many tools like, using height or cover or some kind of distraction or tight spaces or randomized objects that can be used as weapons or things that can confound someone else. Like, for example, snatching a tapestry down and throwing it over someone's face. Does that count as blinding or disrupting someone's vision? Throwing sand in someone's eyes, or fighting in a raging river and making them trip and fall and gets washed down river. If you don't have those options, then the fewer the options, tactically speaking, the more you have a greater chance in your game system that players are going to want to default to the rest of your game system in terms of what benefits them the most. Will it be the most accurate weapons? Will it be the ones that do the most damage? Will it only be the options that they pick that give them such a thing? So if cover is very important in your world, or movement is very important, using and navigating tight spaces versus open spaces, height, endurance, as well as skill and harm from weaponry may also be very important as well. What you hold in your hands, is it important? Does one or two-handedness become very important in your game world? Then consider being able to manipulate some of those things so that players have more options, and therefore it's not the same I hit it with my sword action. Cameron says, I use rocks on battle maps to add some tactics. Real rocks. They look like boulders on the field. I wonder what would happen if I put one rock precariously on top of another rock. Exactly. Why not? And the best way to get your players to use things in the environment is get your enemies to do the same thing, right? Oh, the enemy moves to the side and goes behind the stack of rocks. And you're like, I wonder why. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, they take their action to knock the rocks over, which cuts off your path of travel. Now you need to make athletics checks to climb over top of the rocks. And it's like the PCs might be like, ooh, there's like 6 other piles of rocks. I wonder what we can do with them. Or the PCs are like, whoa, there's 6 other piles of rock. We better get the hell out of here before they start knocking all the rocks down. you know. Also, while this can be a little bit of a one-off, consider in your game mechanics to include aftermath effects. For example, someone casts a fireball. Oftentimes, yeah, Cameron's like, that sounds like a fun encounter. Oh yeah, I love stuff. I absolutely love stuff like that. PCs are like, oh, let's navigate through the precariously balanced pillars and whatnot. And the wide, bulky dwarf is like, you know, stupid narrow passages and try like bumping into them, and one of them falls over, which is basically a foreshadow, right, of what might happen further. And they're like, I see dozens. And everyone's like, dwarf, you better be careful. Or grumble, grumble, right? Like that sounds pretty cool, especially if there's like maybe things jumping on top of the pillars that are disrupting them and causing them to like teeter-tot as they start moving around. And talking about using that encounter with like a bunch of boulders stacked on top of each other, and you could run around kind of knocking them down, whether it's a natural event in your world because of like high winds that carve the rock that way, or those damn kobolds set it up that way because, hey, kobold got to eat, right? It would be pretty fun to do something like that. And aftermath effects are very rarely mentioned in games except for what, like fire, right? They'll go, oh, if you cast fire or throw a Molotov cocktail or light a match or something, flammable things will light on fire. But there's lots of other aftermath effects that might happen in your game world that you could incorporate, even if it's a narrative element. If you're talking about science fiction and someone tries to use, like, I don't know, high impact projectiles in a sealed environment, that might not be smart if something pierces the outer hull of a starship or a habitat or a dome city or something of that nature, right? The same goes for using fire and cold and electricity, or maybe there are other effects in your world, like, oh, when people use magic, it's like a beacon to these blind monsters that happen to be something not called displacer beasts that roam the world and go after people, and if you cast those spells, they come after you. Or there's some kind of chaos magic, and if you don't roll high enough or low enough or whatever your gaming mechanic is, these other things might happen to people. So it could be something that's environmental that happens around the region or something of that nature. Heck, even a battlefield, turns the ground red and muddy from all the blood or dead bodies, or slipping and falling and tripping on entrails, or people so packed together that you can't breathe and might get stomped on or knocked down, and there's no one there to help you up as yet another ally steps on your back by accident or something. Mofa says, back when I could run in-person games, thanks 2020. Yeah. I crafted physical terrain pieces. The visual aid I found can help some players be more creative with jumping on tables, etc. Oh yeah, and of course, rewarding the behavior, both game design and at the table. Reward the behavior you wish to see. If you really don't want your basic warrior type in your game to hit it again with its sword, and you want them to get punched in the face or grappled or leg tripped or stunned or spun around or disarmed or any number of those things, then offer a reward for doing a thing. Now, mind you, a reward doesn't necessarily mean a numerical bonus specifically. It could be what I like to call a give and take. So one of the best monsters to exist in our pulp fantasy, strangely enough, I think, is a vampire. And the reason why I say it's a vampire is because vampires are great puzzle monsters because you can be rewarded for doing a thing. Vampires have a lot of give and take. So, for example, vampires have weaknesses, And they also have benefits for being what they are. Vampires drink blood. They can charm you. They are immune to or can heal rapidly. They can transform into various monsters, maybe even mist, and you start adding in some other capabilities. So, summon darkness, or a flock of ravens or bats, or transform into a wolf, or a bat or a rat or something. And then you start adding in even other things. But they also have limitations: fire, stake through the heart, garlic, holy symbols, sunlight, running water, permission to go inside, so on and so forth. And that makes them dynamic. And so that's just a monster. When you come with player character abilities, for example, and I feel like it's undersold in fifth edition, but I can see them trying to enforce this, but it just didn't come across. It doesn't come across explicitly, and that is the idea that, oh, instead of hitting it with my sword, maybe I would like to, I don't know, do the thing, pull the tapestry down and blind my opponent. Well, what ends up happening is that either players or game masters try to find these complicated rule systems that doesn't benefit the act in the first place. If I've got to make 3 different rolls to pull the tapestry to get a very minor bonus on the tail end, then it doesn't really work, right? But if I have a similar penalty to do a thing, I want to disarm them, but I get a great bonus at the end of it, they are disarmed, then taking the penalty, the take gives me the disarm, which is the give, right? So equal and opposites, a give and take. Oh, well, I can hit it in the shoulder, or I can push them back. Oh, great. Okay, if I push them back, that means the reinforcements can't fit down the hallway or between those precariously balanced rocks that we were fighting in that valley. Then maybe that benefits me more because they can't fit past that individual that I push back into that tight space. And so you guys know me, I'm a big proponent of it. Now, mind you, you don't have to get as detailed as I like to get, but having, at least a handful of options for different character capabilities and what you want to see in your world makes a lot of sense. Cameron says, I put my friend in an underground slave fighting ring with force fields around the battlefield. He immediately looked for a weakness in the force field. I told him there was a weak point panel. Then he used a larger foe to bash into the panel by baiting them into heavy attacks. I was so proud of him. I made the panels do damage, then eventually added a stun effect on the third hit. Yeah, I mean, why not? Having random effects in your world, like, oh, when you're in the desert, here's a d6 random things that could happen. A sand funnel or quicksand. It could. Cameron says we were playing Star Wars. That's another Star Wars. Okay. Sometimes we can get too caught up in the simulation part of game design rather than the meta of the game design. So an example would be Star Wars specifically was designed after pulp action movies and adventure. And pulp action is like a two-fisted, over the top action is rewarded for its own sake, and there's no penalty for engaging in that. And so if you're trying to design a world where you have characters who don't bother wearing lots of armor because that just doesn't fit into the method of the game, or they don't pick up the heaviest, most powerful weapon because that doesn't fit into the game, then you shouldn't add those elements into the game. Meaning, like, if it's better to wear lots of armor, but you're trying to do a piracy, Age of Piracy game, then maybe you should have rules that encourage players to not wear the armor in the first place. And it could be very meta, but if you want to reward the behavior, design rules around it. Cameron says we're playing during the time of the Empire. It's safe to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, during certain periods periods of time. You talk about current day Star Wars, and all of a sudden a flame war starts, and I just start to roll my eyes, like, really. But anyway, yeah, some game systems reward certain behaviors. Like, for example, I will say that. Lastly, I will say terminology, strangely enough, can be very important when it comes to immersion. And I am still to this point, while designing Retcon, the RPG of tachyonic espionage. Thank you, everybody else who came up with that. I didn't. The terminology can be a very strange but influential mechanism to get players and potential people interested in your game. What I mean by that is, for example, there's a game I have called Within the Ring of Fire. And Within the Ring of Fire is a role playing game based around a very harsh, not tribalistic almost, or not very industrialized fantasy world where angry gods have shaped the world and you play a character in it. And, instead of a game master, they have someone known as a flame tender. And NPCs are known as embers. And the player characters are known as stars, as in the stars in the sky. And those kinds of terminology, while it might seem a little chintzy, like, oh, it's not a game master anymore, it's a storyteller. Or like in my world, it's called a timekeeper. Or in Call of Cthulhu, I believe players are called investigators. They're not called player characters. And there's no game master. There is a keeper, like, I guess, a keeper of knowledge or something. And even statistically speaking, don't use hit points, use stress or endurance or grit. Or in the case of my game, I'm using time and drive as a mechanism to measure loss or disability or capabilities or something. There might be a big difference in your world based on, do characters have strength or do they have muscle? Are they enduring or do they have lots of stamina? Are they intelligent or are they knowledgeable? Do they possess instincts or are they observant? And so, based on the words that you use, long words, short words, descriptive words, do they have persuasion or do they have con? Do they have talk or bribery, or is it intimidation or brutality or something? And so terminology, break out your thesaurus, you're going to need it, can mean the difference between a very subtle, this is the art of immersing people into your game. If you're using if you're designing science fiction, try to use scientific terminology for your world. Maybe there's a statistic in your world called void or gravity or technology instead of knowledge in your gaming statistics. Maybe you're like, oh, the only game I know are D20 games with the base 6 stats. Well, then maybe pick other things. Instead of armor class, call it evasion or resistance or split to 2. Calling it, luck, even, instead of hit points. Or you could even use phraseology instead of statistics, like skin of my teeth or my lucky stars or barely got out of that, or I'm the leader now, instead of bardic inspiration or something, or you better listen to me, instead of I don't know, persuasion or something like that. And the more you do that, the greater you can separate yourself out of the norm, even if you're using things that are very common to other game systems. Yeah, like Cameron says, like using translocation versus teleportation. Right. And it could also be an in-world, using terminology that is also used in-world goes to greater lengths to get people to immerse themselves in a game. So if people in the world use the terms translocation, and there are translocation devices, and there are individuals who are gifted with the ability to translocate, then maybe that's a far better term than using teleportation to then describe translocation, right? Sometimes you don't want to have to do something else in the game world, and using old bones from old games tends to do that, where they're like, oh, here's a spell-like effect that causes this other thing that's not even a spell. Why not just make that an effect that is an effect, right? Sometimes you'll see, for example, this is used often in superhero games, not as often in magical or fantasy games, where in superhero games you have, say, an ability called Blast, and it just does damage, and it does damage at a range. And then you get the layer on it. Okay, is it a ray, a single line? Is it a cone? Is it an area effect? Is it controllable? Can you separate your allies out of it? And you have these other options to add on to it. And then you might have damage type. Okay, here are 8 damage types: cold, electricity, fire, psychic, force, necrotic, radiant, or something. Dungeons and Dragons has never done that, but they very easily could take away all those damage type effect spells and just make it one thing called, I don't know, damage cast, and then layer on top of it. Now, one issue with doing something like that in your game, like, for example, let's say you have firearms and then you layer things on top of it. While that might be a great thing to add into your game, having quite a number of examples of using those rules also works wonders. For example, maybe firearm in your science fiction game includes rocket launchers. And so what happens is you take firearm, add extended range, add area effect, explosive, and now you've got yourself a rock. Oh, maybe two-handed is a weakness because you got to, haul it up on your shoulder. Boom, now you have yourself a rocket launcher framed off of the basic firearm or something. And then having those examples, players can very easily go to those examples and go, oh, that is a 9mm, that is a rocket launcher, or that's a fireball, that is a lightning bolt. Cameron says, oh yeah, in this Star Wars game, I try to use as much lingo as possible, and we don't say any other cuss words than damn and hell unless they're in universe ones like Farkled and Kark. Exactly. Yeah. What was it? Frack was used because they couldn't use the other F word in Battlestar Galactica, and there's other like by the gods, or may the force be with you is a terminology used in game. Frack Earth. Yeah, exactly. And so the using terminology and phrases and slang and that kind of thing really works wonders in games. Lastly, I'll say that use unreliable narrators. Unreliable narration is a great tool where you can both establish the concrete nature of the game you're designing and yet leaves it open for interpretation from those who love aspects of your game but don't want to use everything from your game. What I mean by that is an unreliable narrator can describe the politics, the elements of your world, maybe even the weapons and capabilities and things. And an unreliable narrator is spoken forth by a character, named or unnamed that you choose, who describes the world themselves. Like, for example, you could begin your game with a small blurb like, welcome, reader. If this is your first time stepping upon the shores of the lands of, I don't know, Rowan-Ark, then let me introduce you to this world. Now, you've already set up that there's a ephemeral individual that is describing the world to the players. We don't know if that narrator has a agenda, and you can include in an agenda like, the scaled folk, how our nation hates them so, from the 5 generations of wars we've had with them, and the 3 pieces that we've had that they've broken and caused war to ravage the lands once again. Well, that means that no matter how they describe these scaled folk, there's a good chance that they don't like them. Later on in the book, you could even disrupt that by having, say, a chapter described by the scaled folk themselves. Or in your game, maybe there's some description about the scaled folk and how humanity destroyed their hatchlings in the upper north when the eggs were placed in the warm salt springs or something. And then the people reading the book can be like, oh, wait a minute. Did humanity cause this war that they're complaining about by killing their children? This is interesting. And so you can leave those little breadcrumbs. Lastly, don't be afraid to put in a meta through line in your game that subtly leads the people who get your game to, it's a quantum ogring of getting them to lead themselves towards a particular destination. So an example is, superhero games do this all the time, because of the nature of comic books, that you're going to play a hero that stops the bad guys. And you're like, okay, I'm going to make up a costumed shadowy vigilante. I'm going to make up a flowing cape icon of justice and notoriety in the world. I'm going to make up a psychic who goes out and stops crime. Well, you've already surrounded yourself with, like, oh, I'm going to wear a costume. I'm going to have a code name. I'm going to be in this world. Whereas, say, in a fantasy realm, why are people adventuring in the first place? Are they agents of organizations out to acquire as much treasures from a distant land and bring it back? Are they the scouts, the leading force, because society is ravaged and they are traveling as nomadic groups and the players are scouts for these nomadic groups? Are the player characters poor in a land of the rich, and the only way to get ahead is to scavenge as much as they can through adventure? Cyberpunk is very close to that, scavenging from and whatnot. Are they escaping from a desolate world where people are treated as slaves and cannon fodder and food, and they must run for it? Like, you can put in those things, even if the players in present day aren't slaves or aren't running from danger because they are, kick-ass. They understand that the world is shaped by this, and so they might be victims of, or have memories of, or are fighting against, or whatnot in your gaming world. Michael says the simplification of language is part of human history. We tend to drop or reduce suffixes, to location names all the time. Applying this to spells, abilities, or races would be an easy fix. Exactly. And mind you, some of that can be open slang, like, hey dude, what's up? or how you doing? Those can be very easy slang terms in your world, or versions of it. The other way of doing it, of course, could be, something dangerous or harmful or disparaging. The word elf, because they aren't called elf, they're called Irdani or something, could be a slur of some sort. And so in the world, despite the fact that you're like, well, you look like an elf, you got elf ears, and the whole time you're going, mother, if you don't call me Iridani, I'm going to, ooh, and that can really bring people into the world, especially the names of weapons, the names of capabilities. Instead of an axe, it's called a kneecapper. Instead of a spear, it's called an impaler or something in the world. And of course, we have different languages around the world as well. A long sword in Japan called a katana has a different connotation, and then comes with it different, even a mechanism, how it's used, how they're created, and the culture that surrounds it. So you can do that. Mike Gould says calling teleporters or translocators simply porters rolls off the tongue and would be something the common person would do. They sure would. What is the term in eclipse phase that I always bring up? It's casting or resleeving or whatnot. In my retcon game, there's something called zipping into a jacket. There's an origin of individuals that are nothing but essentially neural psychic spirits that are living lives over and over again. They're like reincarnated, and so they have a slang term for that. There are people who suffer from Chronos syndrome. They're called sins. Things. So yeah, I love to do that a lot. My ghoul says I can remember the old Gamma World game where giant flightless mosquitoes were simply called skeeters. Yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. And sometimes they're fun too, right? Like if you have a very dark, desolate world, throwing a little bit of like fun one-offs helps to alleviate the. It could have a little bit of comedy, like using the word skeeters for like mosquitoes. Can have a little bit of comedy to alleviate the stresses of like everything's dark and desolate, and we're just struggling through a post-apocalyptic world with no hope. Cameron said, instead of fireball, we could just say fi-fi, like the cannibals, the second POTC movie. God, I can't. The acronym is not falling off the tongue as it should. Red Dice Diary says, "Oh, Pirates of the Caribbean." Thank you. Fi-fi. Anyway, Red Dice Diary says it's like that old joke. We call guns shooters. How come no one ever refers to a knife as a stabber? Exactly. Exactly. Why don't we do that? It's called hamburger. It's not made out of ham. Michael says Deadlands would refer to the undead as harrowed, essentially referring to them as a crop. Yep. Incorporating like words and phrases and terminology in the world that brings to us connotations of something else. Like, okay, like so let's take Deadlands for example. They use a ton of classic Western terminology as well as like gambling terminology. So in your world, if gambling is a thing that happens everywhere someone goes, and they use that connotation all the time, it really can immerse the people into the world. Like, hey, looks like you dropped your dice there. Where it could be like someone failed to do something, or they're in their worst predicament, surrounded by enemies. Like, yeah, it looks like you dropped your dice. And everybody starts dropping their guns or something. Like it could be something like that, or it looks like I'm holding a better hand there, part. Things like that, and that really can immerse people as well. The act of using Victorian styled language in brutal a brutal world also has certain connotations where people speaking in very civilized tones, covered in blood, surrounded by by the dead and massacres, has a bit of a scary undertone to it as well. Lastly, you can, because we are talking about the third pillar of exploration here, when it comes to exploring, players could discover, instead of handing out gimmies like magic items. And by the way, hey there, 305 man, I saw you in the over in over on Twitch. The idea of handing out magic items doesn't have to be a thing in your game, especially if magic and or items don't exist in your game. It's possible to hand out, for example, let's say the players have the ability in your game to improve their equipment. So offering the potential for equipment improvement is always a great thing. Tons of games use this as a capability, and players who love to go shopping and have rewards love this. So, for example, player wants to improve equipment, armor, weapons, special devices with special abilities. Maybe A, find your materials. B, finding an expert that can get those materials. C, finding a lab or location to get those things all put together means that players might need to gather 3 different elements to receive one gift. And I guarantee you, many players would love to have to go through 3 steps to get one gift than always just getting a 1-for-1. Oh, I killed a monster. Great, I got a magic item. As opposed to, hey, I killed a monster. Thank you very much for doing that. We will use a certain kind of ritual to enchant your spear. Oh, great. But you need, in order to do that with a spear, you need an ashwood to do it. Oh, look, ashwood, where's that at? Well, once it blooms, it's strange red flowers. The white wood must be harvested from this other place. And you're like, great. So that'll make me a magic spear? Yes. Okay, let me go get the ashwood then, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very good thing. Also, using the environment, sometimes people get a bonus because of something somewhere that they can't move. They have to get there to go get it. For example, finding a fountain of youth, or a location with a specific ancient artifact, or a distant land where only on the full moon, standing upon this crest of the hill, can you see a certain thing or be gifted with an insight or something. And maybe players are able to, if you want travel in your world, this makes a great way to go, oh, well, to be gifted by the gods of the sky, I have got to go all the way back to this place on this one hill at this one period of time to be gifted again, to go out into the world for the next 6 months. And then players might start to link things together, like around this world that there's a reason for them to go out and adventure. Lastly, if you're going to hand out lots of treasure, give them something to do with it. Give them something to spend it on, if that is the case. If you're going to grant lots of connections that players have, give them a reason to use those connections and burn those connections, maybe possibly burning those bridges. Cameron says, if you want to do a vampires in New Orleans game, you need a wide range of word choices. It's challenging, but super fun. Nolans. A Nolans vampire chronicle would rock. Nepa? Is it pronounced Nepa? Not Nest Pas? I think it's Nepa. I can't. Oh man, Pidgin languages are rough, dude. I have a terrible ability to put the correct emphasis on the proper syllable. Michael says, I'll hand out things like maps and notes, the chance for allies or pets. Yep. Perhaps a chance to capture a ruin and convert it to their base, etc. These will start new story arcs. Oh, hell yeah. NPCs don't necessarily need to be people. An NPC could be a lone wolf that got lost in the woods that a PC nursed back to health. An NPC could be a flock of birds that just so happens to warn the players of danger. Or a hacker computer programmer, and the PC only knows their handle, but this person gives them little bits and pieces of information. Or a box that when closed and during over the night, they open it up and a small note with barely legible handwriting appears on the inside of the box that the PC keeps with them. And no matter what they do, they have to keep the box closed, put it under their pillow. And when they wake the next day, there might be another note inside, and they're able to read such a thing. That's basically a good way of rewarding the players for having a thing, doing a thing, and whatnot. I'd like to bring up, we're in the last 10 minutes of the show. So I really wanted to get into the role-playing game that I'm developing. And I thought I'd let you guys know about some of the origins and abilities and things, give you a little bit of insight of where I'm going. Of course, none of it is written in stone. It's all floating on the time stream. Yeah. Oh, no. Please, Red Dice, don't. A box? We have such sights to show you. For anybody who, if you want creepy body horror, the Hellraiser movies. Now, mind you, their quality went downhill very quickly, but the concept of the Hellraiser movies, oh my goodness. The Lament, what is the name of that device? I know you guys know it. The Lament Concordia? The puzzle box. I don't know the name of it. Somebody find it. Cameron says, "Why, of course, my friend. I do declare that our libations shall be filled with the most Cajun of blood. You might even taste the spice." There you go. Yeah, Nolans. Yeah. Mike Wool says, "I've had a player literally romance and then marry a female hobgoblin, which created a huge political story arc. The group became part of the Red Sun Khanate, I guess like Khan using the Khanate. I love that. Or it could be Kanate if you really want to go for a different pronunciation. Lament configuration. Thank you guys. Damn, you guys are smarter than me. Yeah, Thomas Anderson brings up the labyrinth from the second movie. Yeah, what is it? The wife whose skin came off and she was trying to get her skin back, and she was like slithering on all greasy and oily on the ground because she didn't have any skin and trying to walk, and she looked real sexy too. I love it. All right, let me stop. One of the things that I'd like to talk about are I have pulled lots of elements from an extreme number of time travel type stories that I plan on using in my time travel game. Um, uh, Joe, J. Cole, who uh, responds to the videos. He watches them, but he's not able to participate live and whatnot. Brought up 7 Days as an example. There's a TV show called 7 Days where they have time travel that you can only go back 7 days to try to stop something. Source code is another element, another thing that I'm pulling from. The latest movie Tenet is yet another, and so I'm pulling from a lot of these trope like time travel. Of course, Terminator is a classic. Back to the Future is another classic, and yeah, I will try and use those. Thomas Anderson says, "I have a whole concept for a universe that all the things we see in movies, movies, stories, etc., are actually really happening somewhere, but due to the static-like nature of the universe, the dreams are not accurate to the reality. So Hellraiser's labyrinth and box is actually a cube that is a non-space that, when opened, it unfolds into an empty universe under ours, only bigger." Yeah. Ooh, I love it. Ooh, Umbrella Academy has some neat time travel stuff going on, worth watching for some ideas. Oh, hell yeah. Oh, I've caught up. I've caught up to now. I don't have the graphic novels, but I love the television show. So, as an example, in this game, and of course, because it's a 2d8 system, everything runs in numbers of 8. But anyway, we have some origins, I'll say, where you could be recruited based on your origin. Many of the people that are recruited by their origins are victims of the fraying of the time stream. So things like there are individuals known as the Sin, suffering from chrono syndrome. There are the Deja, as in deja vu. There's Zeros, Ventures. There are Arcs. There are Punks and Carnates, Millions, and things like that. So, like, for example, and all of them are pretty horrible if you start to think about it. For example, there are people known as Sins, or known as Cindy's, also known as the Syndrome. It is the uncontrolled, rapid relocation of the biological and neurological form to transport itself through time. In other words, these people suffer from a chronic condition that makes them, at random times, pop through time and space. Unfortunately, in the game, okay, let's see if I can describe this. When a Docs agent runs out of time, in capital T, because there's going to be a statistic known as time rather than hit points, or they stumble upon a mirrored branch. A mirrored branch is when you roll doubles in a game. It's a mirrored branching of time. Anyway, if you run out of time or you stumble upon a mirrored branch, that PC will vanish. The vanishing acts in accordance with the vanishing is in accordance with their inability to act. So in other words, that PC gets removed from temporarily. They disappear. But the reason is because Sins can retcon a situation by reminding themselves to move through time, place, to move through time, to place an object, move a lever, or even talk to themselves or another individual to achieve a desired result in the present day. This means at some point in the future, they must go back in time to perform the simple act that they benefited from in the past, which today would be their future or their present, which it's known as backsliding. So, in other words, you could, if you are someone who is a sin or a Cindy or a sinner, you can say, you know what? I really wish I had a gun in here. Boom. You in the future, you could tell your future self to come back in time to put a gun in a potted plant. So then when you walk over to the potted plant, you may look in it and go, oh, there's a gun, right? And so, but see, at some point, you're going to have to actually perform the act of getting the gun and putting it back in the potted plant in the first place. And that could happen at some inopportune times. So that's kind of an example of that. Another example was a deja. Of course, deja vu is a feeling that one has lived through the present situation before. Of course, mainstream scientific approaches reject the explanation of deja vu as precognition or prophecy, yet those who suffer from deja hold true to these feelings and experiences, traumatic to most. For example, a deja is often caught in situations where, through retcon, engage in activities they vaguely remember, yet have now causative evidence of the remembered act. So friends, family, coworkers, adversaries often confront the deja with events from the past they only now remember having done, which means retroactively the act has already been done, even though until that point that they remembered it, it didn't exist in the first place. An agent that runs out of time or is caught in a mirrored branch is paralyzed as they reconcile a present-day memory as a retcon of a now true past activity. A docs agent can expend time to frame a present-day action as a remembered action. This retcons the moment, making this memory true in the deja's timeline. For example, a deja can remember a current gun battle and navigate through it, just now remembering this has already happened in the past. This power can have unintended consequences. A heretofore unencountered adversary now also recalls having the same conflict, fully aware of who the deja is and their affiliations, where previously it didn't exist. So that's why the game is called retcon. You guys are crazy. It moved quite a bit. Sorry, Thomas Anderson. Cameron says, Crash Bandicoot Warped is a fun to play when you've had a few hits in the head. It has time travel. Might be a good brain cleanser for you, DBJ. Just a fun platformer. Oh, sounds pretty cool. Michael says deja sounds like a person haunted by past life memories. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That is exactly it. Thomas Anderson is going off talking about the concept for your world, I presume. One concept for crunning is to place people in a spherical room, lit from all directions, like being inside a fluorescent light bulb. They cannot sleep, they go insane, etc. Basics like torturing them with boredom to spur an exploration of reality. Yeah, deja who? Deja you. Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool name too for an individual. There are people known as zeros. I'll end on the zeros. Zeros. These are individuals who do not exist, not in any timeline. There are no records, no memories, no family, no friends. They are easily forgotten, and evidence of their existence fades from reality. An underground exists of zeros who have banded together. They live on the fringes of society. Most cannot keep a job, build a life, or earn a living. No one remembers who they are. They can't build lasting relationships, and digital traces vanish over time. While this is perfect for an agent in an espionage organization, common folk tend to suffer from severe depression. A most painful encounter is a zero parent whose child cannot remember the parent on a daily basis. Zeros often engage in the arts, like music, sculpture, dance, etc., to try and make a lasting impact, a memory in the minds of others. A zero that runs out of time, capital T, or is caught in a mirrored branch immediately suffers from the debilitating realization they don't matter. A zero agent can expend time to remove themselves from the timeline, even as this retcon makes it untenable in its current state. For example, a car wreck could happen with no driver, a zero arrested, now removed from the system, or breaking into a secure facility, leaving no evidence. The drawback for a zero is having to reintroduce themselves to known allies. Even car airbags, automatic doors, and cell phones will oftentimes not recognize a zero. Yeah. Zero to hero. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's an issue. So Michael says zeros, like 12 monkeys, a man stuck in a time loop. Oh, we have those too. We have those time loops. Time loop situations. They're called grounders, or punks, as in Punxsutawney Phil, as in Groundhog Day. Yeah, they exist. There are actually NPCs that are caught in time loops that they can't get out of. Um, that it will exist in the world building of this world. Thomas is interesting. I've been calling the people behind the central bank, since they create money out of nothing, the zero writers or zero creators, as they decide how many zeros are behind the one. Ooh. How many dollars there are in the world for the rest of us to fight over. Ouch. Wow. Cameron says, this game sounds cooler with every bit you share with us, Deep J. Yeah, I'm leaking it out. Like I said, I'm not married to everything in the world, but I am. If I don't speak it out loud, I don't know if it's going to be true or not. So it's basically like, if I speak it, it will be true, and it also puts me in the mindset of getting it done. This is going to be a micro game, in the in the in the flavor of tiny dungeon and black hack and mecha hack and things like that, like a smaller game. Maybe I'm hoping to keep it below like 40 pages, but it's probably going to reach about 60 to 80, but it'll probably be like a smaller booklet sized, something like this size or whatever. And then I'm going to use the same framework to design other games around it, but this will be the first one. Thomas says, honestly, I think the awareness of such an existing group of people is what spurred on the insane universe of Warhammer. Oof. Thanks, Mofo. Mofo. It's like 400 pages of bust, Mofo. Yeah. I added the Mofo part. It says, Thomas, TA says, and this talk of a great reset is only spurred on the concept of people seeing like those crazy entities that see themselves as gods and 40K games and lore. Ooh, if people live long enough or come about, I could see something like that. But yeah, next week, not sure. Are we going back into? I think we're going back into our cutting class series. Tomorrow, someone has asked me to take a little divergence for my Future Friday. So we're going to talk about. We're going to go once again delve into crime for Future Friday. Not a bad thing to do. You can never have enough crime in science fiction. So we're going to talk about the idea of committing crimes in a society where there's nothing really to steal when you're in a world of post scarcity. And so we'll talk about that. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me ramble on and on about this game as well. So everybody have a great one. I will see you later. Bye. Have a great one, guys.